The letter had come to the wrong desk. That was the truth of it. Ro Aldrich had been a field medic attached to a frontier rescue unit for 4 years. He had no political friends, no royal blood, no record of anything that would make a Concord official notice him. But someone in the human ambassador's office had pulled the wrong file, typed the wrong name, and sent it before anyone checked. By the time the mistake was found, the invitation had already been accepted. Withdrawing it would have been a diplomatic insult. So Ro came to Orin. The planet was older than humanity's entire history with space. The ground was pale gray stone worn smooth by wind that had been blowing since before humans had fire. The Hall of Choosing was carved into the side of a cliff, open on one end to the sky, and it smelled like heat and something electric, like the air before a storm. Ro walked in with the other candidates and stood where he was told to stand. There were 41 candidates total. Kethari nobles in layered armor. Dravani warriors built like walls. Aluan scholars who had studied the Varith bond for decades. And one human in a plain gray uniform who had packed for 3 days because he did not think he would be staying longer. The dragons entered from the far end of the hall. Ro had seen images. Images did not help. The smallest of the 12 adults was twice the height of any being in the room. Their scales caught the light in ways that did not seem natural. Not shining, exactly, but aware. Like the light was being considered before it was reflected back. They moved without sound. That was the part that sat wrong in Ro's chest. Creatures that large should have made the floor shake. They did not. The bonding rite was not a test. There was nothing to pass. The dragons simply walked among the candidates and either felt something or they did not. A bond could not be forced. It could not be performed. Either the spark was there or it was not. The first dragon passed through the line and paused at a Dravani soldier near the front. The hall went quiet. Then the dragon moved on. No bond. The Dravani stood straighter, trying not to show the disappointment. The next dragon paused at an Aluan scholar for a long moment. Long enough that people began to lean forward. Then it too moved on. One by one, the 12 adult Varith walked the hall. They stopped at candidates. They considered. They left. Some candidates were passed without even a pause. Ro was one of them. A copper-scaled dragon with eyes like pale fire walked directly past him without slowing. Another, deep blue, the color of water at depth, turned its head toward him briefly, then looked away. One came close enough that Ro felt the heat of its breath and thought, for one strange second, that something was about to happen. Then it moved on. The Concord representative, a tall Kethari in formal gray robes, began to draw breath for the closing declaration. No bond formed. The words that ended a ceremony when the dragons had made their choice, and their choice was none of these. Ro had already started to turn. Not dramatically. He just turned slightly, the way a person does when they understand something is over and they are deciding which door to walk through. He heard a sound from the side passage. It was small, a scratching, then a pause, then the scratching again, uneven and slow, like something was working very hard to move. The Varith healer near the passage wall made a sharp sound and moved toward it. But she was too slow. Or maybe she stopped herself. Ro did not know. What he saw was a hatchling drag itself through the archway and into the hall. She was tiny, gold scales, but pale, like the color had not finished settling in yet. Ivory along the underside of her jaw and chest. Eyes that were violet and very, very alert for something that could barely hold its own head up. She was roughly the size of a large dog, and moving like every step was an argument she was winning through sheer refusal. She crossed the floor. The entire hall watched and did not speak. She walked the full length of the hall on shaking legs, past the Kethari nobles and the Dravani warriors and the Aluan scholars, and she went to Ro. She bumped her nose against his boot and then sat down heavily, as if the journey had used up everything she had. The bond spark hit him like a hand pressed flat against his sternum, warm and certain and completely without fanfare. Ro looked down at her. She looked up at him with those violet eyes. She blinked once, slowly, the way something does when it has arrived somewhere it meant to be. The Concord representative did not speak. The 12 adult dragons stood very still. The healer who had moved toward the passage had stopped moving entirely. No one cheered, but no one could deny what they had all just witnessed. They told him the bond might not hold. A Concord official named Breveth, Kethari, sharp-featured, Carrying a tablet he kept glancing at as if the numbers on it would eventually arrange themselves into something that made sense. Explained the situation to Ro in the corridor outside the Hall of Choosing. The hatchling, referred to throughout as the subject, was premature by approximately 6 weeks. Her development was incomplete. The bond spark, while technically confirmed, was faint by any measured standard. There would need to be a formal hearing. The Elder Council would need to be consulted. 30 days, at minimum. Ro asked where Sarah would be kept during those 30 days. Breveth blinked. The medical ward. What? I want to know how to get there, Ro said. He was given quarters in the outer hospice. This was, as far as the Concord was concerned, a polite way of housing him far from anything important. The room had one window, a sleeping platform, and a heating unit that worked only if you hit it on the left side. Ro unpacked his 3 days of clothes, did the math on 30 days, and went looking for a laundry facility. The hearing on day 2 was brief and unpleasant. Elder Orith Vel was very old, even by Vareth standards. His scales were deep amber faded to near bronze at the edges, and he spoke in the slow and deliberate way of someone who had never once in his life been told to hurry. He laid out 3 points. The hatchling was too young. The bond was too weak. The human candidate had no standing, no record of distinction, and no business being at a bonding right at all. His tone was not cruel. It was something slightly worse than cruel. It was certain. Ro was permitted one statement. He said, "I'd like to visit her every day." Breveth informed him he was permitted one 20-minute visit per day, supervised. Ro said that would be fine. He went the next morning. Sarah was in a glass-sided enclosure near the far wall of the medical ward, on a bed of heated stone tiles. She was very small in that enclosure. The Vareth healer on duty, an older female named Dravith, broad-shouldered and silent, watched from across the room as Rose sat down cross-legged beside the glass. Sarah was not eating well. The standard hatchling feed sat in a dish she had not touched. She was awake, but barely. She looked at Ro when he sat down. Those violet eyes tracking him with more focus than the rest of her body seemed capable of. He talked to her. He did not know what else to do. He was not a Vareth handler. He was not a diplomat. He was a medic who had spent 4 years talking to injured people in very bad situations because silence made fear worse. So he talked. He told her about the outer hospice and the heating unit that needed hitting. He told her about his home settlement on the second continent, flat land, big sky, fields that turned gold in the dry season. He told her that he had almost not come to Orin because the letter had been a mistake and he had felt, for a long time, that going would just be another way to watch something good happen to someone else. Sarah listened, or she seemed to. At some point, she shifted. Not much. She moved slightly closer to the side of the enclosure nearest him. On the 4th day, Ro noticed she still was not eating the standard feed. He asked Dravith what the feed contained. Dravith told him without looking up from her work. Ro went away and spent 2 hours reading about Vareth hatchling nutrition in the hospice's public database. He came back the next day with a request. It was politely stated. It was also completely outside his authority to make. Dravith looked at him for a long moment, then changed the feed without comment. Sarah ate. Not much, but she ate. By day 10, she was eating consistently. By day 15, the pale gold of her scales had begun to deepen. She still shook when she stood, but she stood. She would pull herself to the edge of the enclosure when she heard Ro's footsteps in the corridor, before he had even come through the door. He did not know what to do with that, so he simply came back every day. He started arriving early. Dravith stopped supervising him closely after the 2nd week. She did not explain the change. She simply placed a low stool beside the enclosure and went about her other work. On day 26, Sarah was strong enough to leave the enclosure for short periods. She spent the first 3 minutes of her freedom walking in a small circle. Then she walked to Ro and sat on his foot. On day 28, Elder Orith Vel came to the medical ward. He walked slowly, as he did everything. He stood at the far end of the room and looked at the hatchling, now clearly healthier, now clearly larger than she had been, curled across the human's folded legs, her head resting on his knee. Ro was reading. Sarah was asleep. It was a perfectly ordinary scene. It had absolutely no business being ordinary, given that none of it was supposed to have happened at all. Orith Vel stood there for a while. Then he left without a word. Breveth confirmed the next morning that the formal dispute had been withdrawn. The bond was recognized. Ro had 48 hours to prepare for transfer to the Warden Academy on Dravos Station. He packed his 3 days of clothes again. Sarah rode on his shoulder. She was still very small. She was warm against the side of his neck, and she smelled like heated stone, and every few minutes she made a sound low in her chest that Ro did not have a word for yet, but which felt, even through the thin early bond, something very much like contentment. Dravos Station did not care about Ro Aldrich. This was not personal. Dravos Station was a large, old, deliberately indifferent place. It had been the Warden Academy's home for 200 years, and in 200 years it had processed thousands of bonded pairs from dozens of species. It had its routines, its hierarchies, its very clear ideas about which wardens were going to matter and which were going to wash out quietly before the first assessment cycle. It slotted Ro into the second category before he had finished the intake process. His training partner was a Kethari warden named Aldous. Tall, composed, with the particular quality of stillness that Kethari nobility cultivated from birth. His bonded dragon was a deep teal male named Sovereign, for years old and already the size of a small ship. They made a striking pair. They both knew it. On the first day of joint training, Aldous looked at Ro and then at Sarah, who was currently riding on Ro's shoulder and was roughly the size of a large house cat, and said, "When your dragon dies, and she will, you will have wasted everyone's time, including hers." He said it without heat, as if it were simply information Ro needed to function. Ro said, "Thank you." Then he went to the orientation briefing. The physical training schedule was not designed with humans in mind. This was not malicious. It was simply true. The running distances assumed Dravani lung capacity. The grip assessments assumed Kethari bone density. The endurance blocks assumed Aluan metabolic efficiency. Ro was slower, weaker, and shorter-lived than essentially every other candidate in his cohort. The instructors noted this in their files. Some of them noted it out loud. He showed up every day and did the work. He was not trying to win the comparisons. He had understood before he arrived that he would not win the comparisons. He was trying to build a record, one day at a time, of simply being present and not quitting. That was the only strategy available to him, so he used it completely. Sarah, meanwhile, was growing. Not fast. She would never grow fast by Vareth standards. But she grew with a focus that the Academy's dragon handlers found difficult to categorize. She was in the juvenile training cohort, technically, but she refused to behave like a juvenile. She observed everything. She remembered everything. When the instructors ran paired flight drills, she watched the adult dragons more than she watched the other hatchlings. She watched them the way someone watches a lock before they pick it. In the 5th week of training, the cohort ran a paired flight exercise. The adult dragons flew formation patterns while their wardens ran ground coordination. Sarah was supposed to fly a simple observation circuit, wide, high, out of the way. She flew the observation circuit once. Then she slipped into the formation. No one noticed immediately. She was small enough to read as sensor interference. She matched the lead dragon's speed and held position for 40 seconds inside a formation that required years of experience to navigate. When the lead dragon banked hard left on the pattern shift, Sarah went with it. Not perfectly, but close enough that she clipped the wingtip draft of a fully bonded adult Vareth 3 times her wingspan. The adult veered. Not badly, but enough. The adult's warden, a senior Dravani named Horace, was furious. He filed a formal complaint. Sarah stood in front of the review panel with her tail wrapped around her own feet and her violet eyes very wide, and did not look even slightly sorry. Ro said very little during the review. He was asked if he had instructed Sarah to enter the formation. He said he had not. He was asked if he understood the safety implications. He said he did. He was asked if he had anything to add. He said she wanted to see if she could do it. The panel was quiet for a moment. Then the senior instructor noted in the record that Sarah had, in fact, held formation for 40 seconds without a single prior drill, which was unusual, and moved on. Through all of it, the bond between them was growing into something with texture. Ro could not hear Sarah's thoughts and words yet, but he could feel her moods like weather. He could feel when she was excited, which was often. He could feel when she was watching something with serious attention, which was also often. And she could feel him. Feel when he was tired, but was not going to say so. feel when something had hit him harder than his face showed. She did not comfort him in those moments. She head-butted him between the shoulder blades, hard enough to make him stumble, and then flew 3 fast laps around the training yard as if to say, "If I can do it, so can you. Stop standing there." In the 3rd month, a Concord efficiency official visited the academy. He pulled Ro aside after a training session and suggested, with great political care, that perhaps the human bond was better suited to a non-combat support role. Less risk, less exposure. The framing was kind. The meaning was not. Ro listened to the whole speech. Sarah sat on a post behind him. The official did not quite look at her, the way people did not quite look at things that made them uncomfortable. When the speech ended, Ro said one word. "No." The official tried to continue. Ro waited. The official glanced, finally, at Sarah. She was watching him with those violet eyes, completely still, with the quality of attention that very small things have when they are deciding whether something is a threat. The official left shortly afterward. Aldous, who had been within earshot, did not say anything. He went back to his sparring form. But later that evening, in the corridor outside the bunk rooms, he stopped walking when Ro passed him. He did not apologize for what he had said on day 1. He just stopped walking, and that was something, and Ro kept moving and did not make a thing of it. Sarah had not said a word during any of it. She never needed to. The distress signal came from a colony called Itha's Landing. It was a mining settlement built into a canyon system on a frontier world. 1,200 people, mostly Kethari and Dravani families, 3 generations deep in the rock. The geological survey had called the canyon stable. The survey had been wrong. A pressure shift in the deep stone had started a cascade. Tunnels collapsing, support structures failing, gas venting from cracks that had not been there the week before. The colony's own rescue teams were overwhelmed. They sent the signal and hoped. The nearest available warden team was 3. One of them was Ro. The lead warden on the mission was Yolith, Kethari, senior rank, 12 years of field experience. She was efficient in the way that well-built machines are efficient. Every action exactly as large as it needed to be, nothing wasted. She had reviewed Ro's file on the transit and had come to a practical conclusion. She assigned him to perimeter support. He was to manage the outer sensor grid and coordinate with the colony's emergency team on the surface. Useful work. Work that kept him away from the complicated parts. Ro accepted the assignment without comment. He understood the logic. The site was worse than the initial report. Yolith's strategy was good. She mapped the accessible tunnels, ran thermal scans for life signs, and began extracting survivors in order of urgency. The work was careful and steady. People came out. Not enough people, not fast enough, but the numbers were moving in the right direction. Ro was on the surface running the sensor grid when he heard something. It was not on the sensors. The sensors were working fine. He heard it through the bond, felt it, more precisely. Sarah was flying a wide pattern above the site, reading pressure and airflow through her scales the way Varith instinctively did in geological terrain. She felt something shift in the deep sub-level to the east. She sent it to Ro not in words, but in direction and certainty, the way she always communicated things she knew were important. He pulled the colony's original construction maps. The east sub-level was a storage basement, 2 floors below the main tunnel network. It had been written off in the initial scan. Partial collapse at the access point had made it read as sealed. The official assessment was that it was empty. Ro looked at the map for about 15 seconds. Then he called Yolith on the comm. "There may be survivors in the east sub-level," he said. Yolith ran the scan again. "Access tunnel is blocked. Structural risk is too high for the return on probability. Sarah's reading pressure movement down there. Something is still." "Warden Aldrich," Yolith said. "Hold your position." Ro held his position for approximately 40 seconds. Then he went to the east access point. The tunnel was narrow and dark and smelled like broken rock. Sarah could not fit inside. She was the size of a large horse now, with a wingspan that made the tunnel entrance look like a gap between bricks. She stayed at the mouth and guided him through the bond. "Here the floor is solid. Here it is not. Here the ceiling is close to the edge. Stop. Step left. Now forward." She could not see him, but she could feel the ground's pressure the way he could feel her attention. Constant, specific, absolutely certain. He found 11 people in the east sub-level. 3 were children. 2 were Dravani adults buried under a section of shelf that had come down at an angle, alive but pinned. There was a juvenile Varith in the back corner, and bonded, maybe 2 years old, the dark gold-green of young Varith that had not finished deciding on a color yet. She pressed herself against the far wall when Rose Light found her and made a sound that was not quite a growl because she was too afraid to make it a growl. He talked to her. He did not move toward her right away. He kept his voice level and said ordinary things, that there was a way out, that he had done this before, that she did not have to trust him yet, but she was going to need to move soon because the ceiling was not going to hold much longer, and he would rather she moved because she chose to then because she had no other options. She let him get close after about 3 minutes. He moved her first, out of the way of the shelf, and then worked on the 2 pinned adults while she watched him from near the tunnel entrance. When he got the first adult free, the juvenile came back toward him. Not because she was no longer afraid. She was still afraid, but she came back anyway. He got everyone out. The last person through the access tunnel was Ro. The tunnel closed behind him, not violently, just a low grinding shift, and then settled rock. About 30 seconds after he cleared it. He stood on the surface. He was bleeding from a cut above his ear that he did not remember getting. Sarah landed beside him and put her head against his shoulder, hard, the way she did when something had been close, and she had known it while it was happening. Yolith stood a few meters away. She looked at the 11 survivors. She looked at Ro. She said, "You were supposed to hold the perimeter." Ro said, "I know." Yolith said, "You saved 11 people." Ro said, "Yes." She did not say anything else. She went back to coordinating the remaining extraction. Ro sat down on a piece of broken stone and let Sarah check the cut on his head. She was very careful with it. She was always careful when she was checking something she had been worried about. The juvenile Varith, before the colony's handlers took her away, walked back across the surface to where Ro was sitting. She stopped in front of him. She pressed her nose briefly to his open palm. Not long. Just a touch, and then let herself be guided away. The Kethari medic who saw it wrote nothing in her report about it. Ro said nothing about it either. Some things did not need to be turned into data. The proposal had a very long official title. In simple language it meant, no more humans in the Warden program. Elder Orith Vel had written it carefully. It did not use words like inferior or unworthy. It used words like incompatible and structural. It noted that the Varith bond was, by its nature, a bond of a lifetime. A Varith could live for centuries. A human lived, at best, 100 years. Bonding a dragon to a creature that would be gone in the span of what was, to the Varith, a relatively short project. This was not a question of capability, the proposal said. It was a question of loss. Of asking a dragon to form the deepest connection available to their species with the full knowledge that it would end inside what felt, to a Varith, like no time at all. The proposal also noted, in precise and measured language, the incident at Itha's landing. Warden Aldrich had deviated from mission assignment. He had entered an assessed high-risk zone without authorization. The result had been positive, but the behavior had been reckless, and recklessness in a warden was a danger to the bond, to the mission, and to the Concord. This was not the behavior of a trained professional. This was the behavior of someone operating on emotion rather than structure. The proposal was going to pass. Everyone who read it said so privately, among themselves, in the way that people say things privately when they believe something is already decided. Ro found out from Breveth, who sent him a brief message that contained the council hearing date and the note. Thought you should know. He sat with it for a while. Then he went to find Sarah. She was on the upper observation deck of their assigned station quarter, lying across the railing with her wings half open to catch the heat from the station's exterior panels. She was the size of a large horse now, and she filled most of the railing, and she looked up when Rose sat beside her with the look she had when she already knew something was wrong and was waiting for him to say it out loud. He told her the whole thing. He did not soften it. She listened without moving. When he finished, there was a pause. Through the bond, he felt something settle in her. Not calm, exactly. The opposite of calm, very still, like a fire that has been covered but has not gone out. He said, "I don't think we can stop it." Through the bond, she sent him something wordless that translated, roughly, as, "Watch me." The hearing was held in the main chamber of the Concord High Council on Neth Station. 12 council members. 3 of them Varith elders, including Orith Vel, who presented the proposal with the same slow certainty he brought to everything. The chamber was full. This was understood to be significant. Most votes did not fill the chamber. At the point in the proceedings designated for responses, a junior clerk near the back of the chamber indicated, in a slightly confused voice, that there was a request to address the council from a bonded Varith. The chamber got very quiet, because bonded Varith did not typically request floor time at council hearings. The clerk confirmed the request was valid under Concord law. A bonded Varith held speaking rights in any hearing that concerned the bond itself. The fact that this particular Varith was 2 years old and currently pressing against the chamber side entrance because she was still slightly too large to enter easily did not change the legality. Sarah entered the chamber. She walked to the center of the floor, which was a long walk, and she made it without hurrying, and she addressed the council in formal Varith, the old register, the one used in the bonding rights themselves. Several council members straightened in their seats. The translator's voice came through the chamber speakers a few seconds behind her. She said, Ro Aldrich's lifespan was not unknown at the bonding rite. His age, his biology, the length of a human life. None of this was a secret when she crossed the hall and chose him. She had known what she was choosing. That was what choosing meant. If the Concord now decided to override her choice because it was inconvenient, because it was short, because it ended sooner than some would like, then the bonding rite was not what the Concord said it was. It was not sacred. It was not a dragon's true choice. It was a convenience that the Concord permitted when the choice was comfortable and revoked when it was not. She said, every bonded pair in this room, look at your Varith and ask them if their bond would mean something different if the council could end it by vote. She said nothing further. She stood in the center of the chamber and waited. The first vote was from Council Elder Waith, a Varith whose bond was 40 years old. She voted against the proposal. The second Varith council member, Elder Sorn, voted against. The third, a younger elder named Brev, paused for a long time and then voted against. The proposal failed by 1 seat. Orith Vel left the chamber without speaking to anyone. In the outer corridor he walked past Ro, who had been waiting outside because he had not been permitted in. The old dragon stopped. He was very tall, and he was very old, and he looked at Ro for a moment with amber eyes that had seen more years than humanity had spent in space. He said, in low Varith, for words that the translation unit rendered as, she chose well, human. He did not wait for a response. He walked on, slow and deliberate, as he always moved. Ro stood in the corridor for a while after he left. He was not sure, exactly, what he had just come close to losing. He was not sure what to call what he felt about it not being lost. She had known then. She still knew now. Some things did not require 2 years of evidence to be true. They were simply true from the first moment, and everything after was just the world catching up. 5 years after the bonding rite, Ro Aldrich had a record, not a legend. Records and legends were different things. Legends were built from one extraordinary moment, polished until the ordinary parts fell away. Records were built from 5 years of showing up, from Iritha's landing and the 11 survivors, from a border mediation on Death Colony where a Kethari trade dispute had almost turned into a firefight, and Ro had sat down uninvited at the negotiating table and refused to leave until both sides were too tired to keep being angry. From a search mission, a containment mission, 3 first response deployments, and 1 very strange incident involving a miscommunicated distress code and a herd of large alien animals that Ro never talked about if he could help it. The record was not impressive in the way that Dravani war records were impressive or Kethari diplomatic records. It was impressive in a quieter way. It was the kind of record that made people say, if something has gone wrong and you need it fixed, send Aldrich. Sarah was no longer small. She was never going to be a large dragon by Varith standards. The Academy healers had said this early, and they had been right. But she had grown into herself. Gold scales fully settled into the deep, warm color of late afternoon light, ivory at her jaw and chest, wingspan that blocked out a meaningful portion of any sky she flew through. She was elegant in the way that things become elegant when they have grown exactly into what they were meant to be. She was also fast, and she was precise, and every dragon who had ever underestimated her based on her size had eventually stopped doing that. The unknown vessel appeared on the frontier sensor grid on a quiet transit day. It was large, not aggressive in its movement. It did not approach fast, did not target anything. but its design was completely outside any recorded Concorde database. No registration. No known species configuration. It held position at the edge of explored space near a colony called Weshan's Post, which housed 40,000 people and had not been built with anything like this in mind. The Concorde's military response was being assembled. It would take time. The nearest available Warden team, the only team inside response range in the next 6 hours, was Ro and Sarah. The briefing was short. Proceed to Weshan's Post. Establish visual contact with the unknown vessel. Do not escalate. Hold position until military support arrived. The word they used was observe. Everyone understood this meant, do not start anything you cannot finish, and please do not die. Ro and Sarah flew out to meet it. The vessel was larger up close. It held position as they approached, which was something a hostile vessel would not have held position. Sarah flew a slow arc around it, reading it the way she read everything. And through the bond, she sent Ro her impression, cautious. Watching, not certain of them any more than they were certain of it. Communication was the hard part. Standard Concorde hailing frequencies produced no response for the first 40 minutes. Ro tried different signal formats. He tried visual pulse patterns. He tried, on something close to instinct, a very simple repeating tone, not language, just pattern, the kind of thing that said, I am here, I know you are there, I am not moving toward you. The vessel responded to that one. What followed took 6 hours. The translation unit struggled from the first minute. The language structures were unlike anything in its database. Ro worked through it piece by piece, the way he had worked through everything for 5 years. When a word failed, he described around it. When a concept failed, he broke it into smaller parts. When the translation unit gave up entirely, he drew on the Varith signing language he had learned at the academy because he had thought it might be useful someday, and now it was, because the vessel's crew, the Surath, as they came to understand, seemed to process geometric pattern better than linear sound. He learned 2 things about the Surath in those 6 hours. The first was that they had encountered Concorde military ships before and had been driven off. They had not come back for years. They had come back now because something about Weshan's Post had drawn them. Later analysis would suggest it was the colony's geothermal energy signature, which matched something in the Surath's own history. They had not come to attack. They had come, in their own way, to look at something familiar from very far away. The second was that they had no concept of the bond. The idea that 2 different creatures could choose each other, not through biology, not through territory, not through resource competition, and then stay chose across years of difficulty. This did not translate cleanly. The Surath kept returning to it. Their instruments were apparently reading the bond signal between Ro and Sarah and could not categorize it. One of their vessels moved slowly closer, not aggressively, and Ro understood it was the same thing people had always done with things they did not understand and found interesting rather than frightening. It moved closer to see. Ro tried to explain the bond. He was not a poet. He said something like, she crossed a room to reach me when everyone else had already decided I was not worth reaching. I stayed because she needed someone to stay. After a while, neither of us was the same as we had been before that. He was not sure how much of it translated. Sarah lowered her head and rested her jaw gently on top of his helmet. She had been doing this since she was small enough to sit in his arms. She did it the same way now, just larger. The weight of it was familiar and steady. The Surath did not open fire. They did not leave. After a long pause in the exchange, a translation came through that the unit rendered haltingly as, you chose each other without requirement. This concept. We would understand more. Can this exchange continue? Military support arrived 4 hours later. There was nothing for them to do. The Surath vessels had pulled back to a respectful distance, and a communication channel was open, and Ro was still in the middle of it. Later, in the debrief, a senior Concorde admiral asked what had worked. What strategy, what approach, what technique? Ro thought about it for a moment. He said, I just talked to them, the same way I talk to anyone. The admiral wrote that down, clearly not knowing what to do with it. Ro and Sarah flew back to Weshan's Post as the sun was going down over the colony. They landed on the outer hull of their ship, above the busy business of military arrivals and Concorde officials, and the beginning of something that would eventually be called First Contact and studied for generations. It was quiet where they were. Sarah stretched her wings once and folded them and lay down on the warm hull, plating with the ease of something that had found its place in the world and was not in any hurry to leave it. She had chosen him in a hall full of silence and doubt, when she was too small to stand straight, and he was the only one who had not already walked away. 5 years later, with 40,000 lives quietly continuing behind them, he understood at last what she had seen. Not what he was, what he would become, if someone just refused to give up on him first. The stars came out, one by one, over Weshan's post. Sarah made the low sound in her chest, the one from the first day, the one he had never found a word for, the one that had always felt like something between contentment and certainty. He leaned back against her side and let the sound settle around him like something that had always been true and was only now, after all of it, beginning to feel that way.